This is the Practical Culture Spoilercast, a podcast devoted to diving deeper on the TV and movies, maybe even sometimes the video games that we and you are into. I'm your host, Logan Bowe, podcasting from Lehigh, and I'm joined as always by the one, the only Bob Caswell in the Bay Area. How are you, Bob?
Hey there. Doing pretty well. How's it going with you?
Just hanging out. You know me.
Glad to hear it.
This week we spoil First Man, and we'll also talk about what we're consuming and even make a top 5 or so list by the end. If you like what you hear, look for us in your usual podcast app and at practicalculture.com, also on YouTube. We recommend to check all that out if you're into the show. We're spoiling TV, movies, probably sometimes video games. It's the Practical Culture Spoilercast. Let's rock. Oh, man, it is good to be back. Bob's still rolling along here. Before we get into the spoiling, as always, let's chat a bit about what we're watching or playing, yeah?
Yeah.
This week, surprisingly, it seems like we've got a little break in the Oscars, homework movies.
Right.
So that's okay.
It's just like everybody agreed this, let's have a Halloween movie and then call it good. And we'll pick up where we left off the week before. And I'm like, all right, sounds good.
I guess so. But one thing I have done a little bit is I've actually started Assassin's Creed Odyssey.
Ooh, tell me. I want to compare notes. We haven't talked about this at all. This is like live on the air.
Yeah, well, I feel like the thing that's been engrossing me most of all is this Alexios or Cassandra conundrum. Because so many people just say Cassandra's the way to go, which the iconoclast in me is like, maybe they're missing something. Maybe the Alexios is what I really want to be just because everyone's doing something different. And it's just been really hard to find. But I did find something that actually played a lot of them as both, and they're sort of distinct, even though they're like mostly the same character, just man and woman. But I don't know. In the end, I actually pulled the trigger with Cassandra.
Okay. All right. So we're having the same experience-ish. I'm playing Cassandra, and I'm enjoying it a lot. What do you think other than that? How far into it are you?
I'm not that far, maybe like 3 hours.
Okay, did you get to the title screen? Because it has quite the long prologue.
Oh my god, it's
about 3 hours long.
I've had like plenty of cutscenes. I've had I remember being the one as Leonidas at Thermopylae.
Yeah.
I've done that one. I've gotten past that. I've had some cutscenes like with Marcos and about my history washing up on an island when Marcos met me. There's one still to come?
Yeah. It's funny.
Okay.
It takes a while. As soon as you see the title screen, it's like Assassin's Creed Odyssey. And I'm like, whoa, this is like 3 hours in, guys. Like, a lot of games are half over.
Okay. Interesting. Anyway, so that's something I've been doing in my spare time. I like it fine. There's a lot of still trying to decide how much I like it because it's more role-playing gamey than the other Assassin's Creed I played. Also, stealth games are not always my thing, and of things that can variously be called open-worldy, the open-worldy factor of, the only other Assassin's Creed I played is Black Flag. That aspect of it wasn't my favorite of open-world games, so I don't know. I'm still very much the jury's out, but it could be a real winner for me. That's still on the table in terms of possibilities.
Got it. Well, since we're here anyway, I just want to say briefly, I'm also playing it. I'm a bit further along than you are, and I absolutely love it. But I also don't want to oversell it, but I kind of do.
Because you don't want to trigger my iconoclast again.
I know. Yeah, I'm really, really enjoying it. It's got the best balance of so many things to me. It's really, the combat is solid. By the way, it's not really a stealth game is what you called it. You don't have to do stealth at all. You'll learn that as you kind of go through the trees of abilities and stuff. But if you just want to be a warrior, you can get away with a lot less stealth than most Assassin's Creed games. The dialogue trees are great. The setting in ancient Greece and the war between Athens and the Spartans and all that kind of stuff. My big thing, I just want to say, is am I going to be able to crank this out before we get into Red Dead Redemption 2's territory, which is only like a week and a half away? That's my first world problem I wanted to share. I wish I could just take a week off work and just play Assassin's Creed. But then I also don't want to say it's not a game you want to just breeze through so quickly. If so much stuff wasn't coming out, this would be like months and months of good times.
Yeah, people say expect 60 hours to finish it, which is a pretty long game. Like, I mean, a week off work doesn't even quite get you, you know?
Right. Anyway, well, this is not the Assassin's Creed podcast, but we'll save that for later.
Anything else you got cooking? TV, video games, movies?
Not really. Just Red Dead Redemption 2 is coming up, and then some Oscar pick stuff that we've talked about, but I think it's really all Assassin's Creed right now.
One thing I think I'm about ready to dive into the current season, the most recently ended season of Better Call Saul.
Okay.
So that's going to happen to me too. Anyway, ready to get to this?
Yeah, let's do it.
First Man, a look at the life of the astronaut Neil Armstrong and the legendary space mission that led him to become the first man to walk on the moon. I feel like in today's day and age, when it says first man, it like implies that a woman beat him to it. But whatever. Starring Ryan Gosling and Claire Foy, directed by Damien Chazelle, written by Josh Singer, who, as I mentioned on the main show earlier, he seems to do a lot of journalism movies. The Post, Spotlight, The Fifth Estate, and of course we have source material. It's based on the book by James R. Hansen. What did you think, Bob?
Well, I really like this a lot, and here are some words that come to mind. I would say space, perseverance, science, tragedy, somberness. I feel like I have to check box my woke cred. White people. I mean, is a movie like this allowed to be made anymore? I mean, it is what it is because that's how it is or was. But anyway, there's a lot of pseudo backlash. Not a lot, but some online that I found kind of hilarious. Anyway, I really like this movie. I recommend it. I think it is a good look at this unique story. But if you want more out of it than that, then, there's a lot of other things to see for sure. Yeah,
sure. For me, I'd certainly highly recommend it. But it's an interesting contrast with A Star is Born last week and First Man this week. I both really liked him, both recommend him quite a bit, but they feel very different in my admiration for them. I guess I find that First Man is more impressive. I see what's going on, and I find it impressive intellectually, psychologically, whereas A Star is Born just really moved me emotionally. And not to say that I guess either of these movies is completely devoid of the other, but their strengths are in polar different ways. So I feel like this First Man is really trying to be an artistic statement, and I sort of get off on stuff like that, so that gives bonus points for me, even if it's not 100% successful. Not saying it is or it isn't, but just the fact that it's going for something is something that I end up liking quite a bit.
That's funny because I just to contrast your thoughts with mine, I felt like A Star is Born was more impressive because I felt like the skill and technique required to pull off being a rock star and having a great voice and making music that's believable in the context of the story and all this stuff, I find that more rewarding as a payoff as like, oh wow, this is a labor of love that's completely engulfed by the work that must have gone into making this happen exactly this way. Whereas I know it's not fair, but with First Man, a lot of it was like, oh, well, special effects are pretty good nowadays. So to recreate how rickety spaceships were in the 60s, I mean, how hard could that be? I mean, but that's not fair. I mean, it's probably hard. And it's done really well. But anyway, that's just to say, funny that you use the adjective impressive because that's exactly what I would have given the other movie.
Well, it's interesting. I don't disagree with what you're saying. I guess maybe it's semantics to some degree. I don't know. What I'm trying to get at is that I just feel emotionally drawn to A Star is Born. Like I'm sure the rest of my life I'll watch A Star is Born way more times than I'll watch First Man.
Sure.
I think of it affectionately. I like it. It makes me happy to think about it. Whereas A Star is Born did some really cool things that I admire and that I'm amazed someone could pull off, but that I have to think about. But it sort of tickles my my intellect. And
Got it.
That's what I mean when I say impressive. It could be semantics. Maybe there's a better word, but that's what I'm trying to get at, as opposed to Star is Born when I say that.
Makes sense.
So as we're going to get into the spoilery part of this, I have to say it's a little bit tricky to cover in a lot of depth, if I'm honest, because it's not about what happens. It's one of the most famous stories of the modern world, getting to the moon. but it's about how the movie presents it. And certainly Damien Chazelle makes a lot of choices in how he presents it.
Mm.
But it makes it a little bit not as so linear to really dive into, is what I feel like.
Yeah, although some of the spoilers that were new for me, and maybe it's just because I haven't researched this story in a long time, since like elementary school or something, but there was a lot of death involved leading up to, the actual first man getting to be on the moon himself and returning successfully, Neil Armstrong, that is. There's so many ways that this could go wrong, and it did go wrong so many times. I was surprised by how successful it was in the end, even though we know that, because I'm thinking out loud here a little bit, Logan, but isn't there a party that's like, wouldn't it make more sense that the first time a man got to the moon, it was also, we probably would have lost him and he didn't get home. Something would have gone wrong on the way back, but it just all worked out. So like both he's the first man and he got to come home and live a long life and all that kind of good stuff. That's neither here nor there. It's just a random point I'm thinking of right now. But
no, in fact, I mean, we can go thematically just as well as chronologically, and I like it. So let's talk about that. Yeah, I agree that. I was actually pretty big space geek in even up through junior high, middle school, I guess. So yeah, it's been a long time since I've thought about the details, but I remembered most of the details pretty well. But you do bring out some really interesting points that I want to expand on. One is that I certainly knew that people died. I definitely knew that, like, one of the big things was that Gemini 8, I guess, when they had their oxygen-rich environment and they had the spark, so they burned up. I knew that was going to happen. And also, you're right that the odds are not that great that the first time they really went for the moon, it actually worked. But I feel like, because when you're young, a young teenager looking at these things, it's like, oh, they died. Oh, that sucks. Of course, but the next time, of course, it worked, because that's what you do. You just try again. And, well, of course, it was a 100% chance because it worked, right? That's how you think when you're young and thinking about these things. But what this movie did was it made those things a lot more real to me than my middle school research ever did. Like, yeah, it's super crappy that those guys died, and it could have made people a lot more hesitant about going forth. They even talk about, is this really worth it in the cost of lives and money? And one of the best scenes of the movie is when he's about to go on his Apollo mission to the moon, and his wife, played by Claire Foy, is like, no. There's a chance you're not going to make it back, right? Yeah, of course there's a chance. Well, so you're going to tell the kids. You're going to prepare them for that.
Yeah.
Made it a lot more real that even if as a country we could maybe sacrifice some people on this journey, to ask his family to potentially sacrifice it, that's real, and it's scary, and it just made me see it in a different way.
Yeah, and I love that scene for another reason, because it was so indicative of his personality. The way he talked to his own kids is like, so do any of you have any questions?
His kid's like, you might not come back, right? Well, then he gave like this press conference answer. We have full confidence in the mission, and we expect that I will come back.
And they're like, okay,
but you might not, right? Yeah, I might not. Yeah,
and I liked seeing that side of him, because he was such a he's such a notorious figure in history. Notorious isn't the right word. Revered almost. Well,
the first person to get to the moon. I mean, it's like your Christopher Columbus's, or it's like, whoa, that's landmark events.
Yeah. But I like seeing the human side of him, is all I'm saying. And I thought the movie did do that super well, because it is first and foremost about him in all of his quiet, stoic splendor.
But that's another great point. The him that we get it felt very 60s-ish, like all throughout the movie from the I guess we just got through talking about this, but for the Spoilercast, we get to expand on it, I suppose. But very reserved, buttoned up, like almost repressed. I have some notes on this that I'm trying to look, because it's not the same order. But
while you're looking for that, I just want to say, I don't know if this makes me an asshole, but there's a part of me, just a little part, people, where I was like, oh, is this the part of life where when people say, "Oh, I wish things were I wish things were as good as they were back then," or "Make America Great Again," or something? Like I'm like I had some sort of hint of like life in the '60s as it's portrayed here. Never mind all the atrocities and human rights or whatever, but just the way people went about their business, and not everything was everybody's business, and you kept to yourself, and you just got your work done, and you raised a family, and you had roles, and you stuck to them. There was some poetic floweriness that resonated with me. I'm like, oh, this is an interesting. This must have been how it was for my parents, and it's not all. Can you believe how racist they were back then? Type of stuff. I mean, there were real people living real lives, and this seemed like a accurate portrayal of that, as far as I could tell, or at least an intriguing one.
Yeah, well, from early on, when he has the interview, when he's applying for the program, and he's in that room, and it's sort of interesting because we've got Caesar and Coach Taylor are asking questions, and not really. It's really Kieran Hines and Kyle Chandler. And actually, is Kieran Hines not really Caesar anymore? He's like that waddling dude in Game of Thrones, right?
Yeah, I guess that's his new thing, but I think of him as Caesar
He'll
still.
always be Caesar to me, too. But they're asking these questions, and he's just very even compared to all these men in the 60s, he's still like straight-laced, buttoned up, repressed.
Yeah.
And they ask him a couple things. One is like, well, why is the space race important to you? And I feel like he sort of fumbles over his answer. It's something like, well, I feel like when you get up there, perspective changes, and it helps us see things more clearly in our perspective on Earth. I just felt like it wasn't like a polished answer, but I got what he was saying. And it wasn't the answer they were probably looking for, which is like, we got to beat the Soviets.
Well, that's the thing, is it was like the perfect answer, because it felt like, oh, that wasn't perfect, but it was just close enough that now it seems so real and human. Like, he's the original like reality TV star that you try to manufacture, but then you can tell is manufactured, but then you try to pull them back, and then you try to, I don't know, like just his natural charisma, which is this lack of charisma, turned out to be charismatic somehow. It's really interesting.
Yeah, well, that's an interesting way to put it too, because before I expand on that, I just want to throw another chess piece on the board, develop another piece in the opening, I guess. And the other thing that they ask him in that is that, so your daughter died. And he's like, is there a question? Like,
Yeah.
will that have an effect? It's like, well, I think it would be unreasonable to assume that would not have an effect. Is that a yes or a no?
I love that answer, though. I thought that was brilliant. He's like, yeah. Do people take shits? I mean, how would it not?
But if you didn't know what he was saying, if you like had subtitles or you just watching and didn't understand it, he didn't seem like he cared. His demeanor, just the words would be like, it would be reasonable to assume that someone would have an effect. But he could also say, but I'm not a reasonable person. I'm more oppressed than all of y'all, so no. I mean,
or he could have said something like, I don't want you to worry about it. I've got my own demons there, but but that's like all like so 2018 to be like, the self-aware Bob here would like to explain to you his meta critique of that question versus the answer that I want to give you, and the one that's in my head, and I'm just going to reveal it all, and there's nothing hidden or mysterious about me. He's like exactly the opposite.
Yeah, and so what that made me start thinking of is that manliness in the 60s is sort of a theme of this movie. It's on display.
Interesting.
And being out of touch with your emotions to an extreme degree. But what it made me think of was maybe that was actually highly adaptive for this kind of work. Because, I mean, his daughter isn't the only person who dies in the movie. And I guess I haven't really mentioned that a ton. But it actually happens really short in the movie, just to do a footnote real quick.
Yeah.
That's one of the first things you see in the movie. His daughter is sick. And dies, boom, real fast. I guess we mentioned that they asked him. But that does happen really fast. And we don't get a chance to process it, probably because Neil Armstrong doesn't get a chance to process it. It just happens.
Right.
But she's not the only person who dies in the movie. A lot more people die. And maybe the ability to put that on hold, focus on the task at hand, maybe repression was necessary or adaptive. And it kind of makes you think about the stereotypical man traits of being closed off, and whether there are some positive reasons, some pros to the reasons men evolved that kind of tendency. It lets you keep on task if you have something important to do, even if you may suffer for it as a man.
Yeah, I think those are some good thoughts. I also wondered at what point we were going to see him like let loose, or like what does he do for fun, or like how does he talk to his friends? But man, he was like straight laced, buttoned up, like across the board with his wife, with his neighbor, with his friend, with his colleagues. I
Yeah,
was just like, wow.
the most we get to see is when it's like an engineering problem. It's like, I learned something interesting. It's like if you need to go down, then you actually have to. Well, I can't remember what it is. Slow down. Whereas that'll speed you up because you go to a lower level of the atmosphere. But that's the opposite of what you're taught as a pilot. But it's really cool because the math works out. So that's interesting.
And his wife's like, cool. I'm glad to see some emotion.
Yeah, right. So that was the most excited or enthusiastic I ever seemed to get about something. The math works out. What do you get the odds?
Oh, makes me realize I'll never be an astronaut. I don't have the demeanor.
So let's see. But while we're talking about, I don't know, just forget I made any segue at all. So there is some buzz about this movie before it came out. And Marco Rubio, United States Senator from Florida, of all people, complained that there was no scene of Neil Armstrong planting the U.S. flag on the moon. I guess I heard about
yes.
that.
Okay.
And I guess he felt robbed, or that the U.S. didn't get its spot in the sun, didn't get its honor as the nation to achieve the moon landing. But the reason I bring that up is that there is definitely a strong patriotic and explicitly U.S. focus to the movie, at least in the sense that patriotism was clearly a drive for a lot of the people involved.
Sure.
Space race, us versus the Soviets. We're losing to the Soviets in a lot of ways, as for the people who say this. Plus, later on, when they're on the moon, you clearly see the flag, even if you don't get that one image of like astronauts planting the flag. So, as much as I dislike getting too political on this show, I'm going to have to say, Marco Rubio, you're being crazy in this instance.
Yeah, I tend to agree because I feel like that would say much more as to the nature of 2018 flag love than like as a historical movie, and in the context it was shown and the way the movie was portrayed. I really liked that it was patriotic, but it was accurately patriotic. Like, this doesn't need to be patriotic for our needs in 2018. That's Marco Rubio's problem. Like, don't mess up a movie for like, that's a stupid criticism. I mean, I don't know. I can't even. But I'm glad you brought it up because that's what people go for. Is he probably went into this movie and was disappointed just that there wasn't enough like positive propaganda for him or something. I don't know.
But it wasn't devoid of that. It wasn't like they were trying to scrub clean. Like some human, Uganda, I don't know, France, who knows who made it to the moon. It's not like that at all.
Right, but it would be the same thing as like inserting a token black man on the team, even though that's not historically accurate. It's like, don't overdo it because you want to do something right. Just do it well for what it is. So there you go.
Yeah. So,
Which is another criticism, by the way. I don't know if did you research any like anti-wokeness about this movie, that the fact that it exists with all these white people is a bit much? And
I've heard a little that maybe it was white even for NASA standards in the 60s.
I'm like, okay, I don't know. I guess I don't know what to say other than sorry you feel that way, but it's still a good movie.
Yeah, I'm not qualified to speak to that, but I've heard a little bit about that. So we got two main programs here, right? Gemini is like the first one where they test out all the kinks, and then the Apollo's when they really start doing things. And Gemini, which I think I mentioned on the other show, but so weird because my high school science teachers and me reading it always said Gemini, because that's how I feel like I've always heard the Greek word, or the astrological sign is like Gemini, right? Anyway, But everyone says Gemini in this program. But I guess I'm trying to somehow lead up to one of my favorite scenes also in the first half of the movie is when they're talking about this new thing. Everyone's there. They're trying to be manly and ambitious and tough. Mm-hmm. But Kyle Chandler tries to explain the scope of what they're trying to do. And he I can't think of his name in the movie, but so Kyle Chandler, I'll just call him. He like draws a circle. He calls Earth on a chalkboard, and then he starts drawing this line to show how far the moon is. And he continues his line all the way to the end of the chalkboard. And he like stares at his assistant. He glares at him, who moves this other chalkboard, and then he starts going partway onto that line and the moon, and then he quips, "That's the scale. Check it." And of course, it ends up not being quite right. Close, granted, when they check it, because they do check it, but not perfect. But it's a great scene because it uses humor and swagger to get the point across of the magnitude of what they're trying to do.
Right. I like that a lot too. And it also embodied what it was as another 60s moment, like, oh, chalk, not whiteboards, you know?
Yeah, let alone computers, images,
Right.
PowerPoint presentation.
And it just felt like there was this materialism that was just, everybody was connected more directly. Like, I have to use physical things if I want to.
Yeah, it's really analog in a way
yeah.
that expressed the 60s. Chalk is very analog. Even whiteboard is still, but chalk feels very analog that way. And speaking of that, like, we got the very first scene of the movie when he's up in the air and he bounces off the atmosphere, and he has to think fast to figure out how he's going to get back down. And you're in there with him. It is very zoomed up, very intimate, but you feel the urgency and just the physical strain that all these G's or the switching directions have on him. And you see the analog dials of, like, if he's going up or down. There's that, and then anytime they lift off, you feel the rumble in a way that probably is really good to see this on the big screen in a movie theater, because just the noise and everything's shaking.
Yeah.
It feels like way more intense than a plane lifting off. Just the violence of this whole endeavor is right there in your face.
I feel like this is definitely going to be nominated for whatever that sound design award is, with the Oscar for that.
There's like two of them, and I'd have no idea what the difference is.
Yeah, I know. That's a good point.
Sound editing and sound design, I think, right?
But for sure, both. One or both. It definitely gives you the impression that stuff was made by hand with, like, nuts and bolts and pieces of metal and stuff. Whereas nowadays, you pick up an iPhone and you're like, did like alien robots make this? Or, you know, it just doesn't. Anyway, and so that's another aspect of this whole thing that just felt very real. Like, this could fall apart at any time. It isn't digitally constructed perfectly like everything is nowadays. So that was really fun to see.
And as we've alluded to, people do die, and everyone's like in this close-knit community. So we see some of the fallout on the families, like when Ted Kennedy dies. Not Ted Kennedy. Ed White, played by Jason Clarke.
Yeah.
And his wife is just not dealing very well, and Claire Foy's character goes over and helps a little bit. But we just see, this people could die, and they actually have families, and it is super risky, and it sucks, and let's not forget about that.
Yeah, and it messes up everything for everyone who's left behind. Yeah, there are a lot of little things like that were, you know, persevere, push forward, move on, but at the same time, it showed kind of some of the residual leftover outcomes, which were kind of little mini tragedies in and of themselves. So it doesn't dwell on them. That's not really the point of the movie, but just that's how it was. Yeah.
And it just magnifies the cost that these whole families, in addition to the men mostly involved in the space program, had to do, and that we asked of them. That's just, like I say, a way that I haven't really felt before. So what else do I want to say? You know, we get to the point where they're flying to the moon. They've decided they're gonna chosen Neil Armstrong's gonna lead it. We got Buzz Aldrin. I think we should actually talk about Buzz Aldrin a little bit, because he's one of the most famous astronauts we have, and Corey Stoller played him, and I like Corey, but he came across a little douchey, didn't he?
He really did, and I don't know if that was on purpose or dialed up a little higher than Damien Chazelle realized, but yeah, is he still alive? I wonder what he thinks.
I think Buzz Aldrin is alive, I think. But like, one of them, I remember when some of them died, it's like, hey, well, if he's dead, that means I have a better chance of getting him to space. I'm like, don't say that. Hey, I'm just saying what we're all thinking.
And then he's like, maybe you shouldn't.
Yeah.
He is still alive, and he's 88 years old. All right.
Good for him. But yeah, so we got Buzz and Neil. They're ones going onto the actual moon. We have so much violence and analog nature, tactile, palpability, whatever words I can use to sort of express how much you feel this movie sensorially when you watch it. And then they get to the moon, and it's just like quiet, pristine, crystal clear, and quiet, especially, which I feel like is such a contrast from the rest of the movie.
Yeah, I noticed that too. Well, more so now in hindsight, but with talking with you about it, but it was quite a bit different. And it almost felt like it was in black and white for a little while, but I think that's just the way the moon looks.
Yeah, the moon is pretty monochrome, right? And what they're wearing, it just has a little tint of gold, but it feels, very black and white.
Yeah. So what did you think about the personal story with his daughter and the bracelet that she, so we're on the spoiler cast, we can talk about it. I guess there's some reason to believe that that he really did something like that. So basically he had his daughter, who passed away when she was 2, had a cute little bracelet, and he held onto it, and he ended up letting it go into a giant crater on the moon as part of his meandering about on the mission. And it was very shot in a just pacing wasn't, it was just, everything was slowed down. It took its time, and it was sort of like he was making peace with his daughter's death. It was a nice little scene. What did you think?
I felt it was a little bit lacking, just because to add one other sense in there, they were definitely trying to make it a through line. And the other thread that you didn't mention was at one point he gets very upset at Buzz Aldrin, I think, and he leaves a party where all the astronauts' families are there together, and then his wife has to get a ride home with Ed White, played by Jason Clarke, and she asks him, "Hey, does he ever mention his daughter's death to you?" It's like, "No, not really." And she says, "Yeah, he doesn't really mention it to me either." So that's another little tidbit we get that's supposed to be a through line here, and I feel like it's trying to convey the idea that part of his motivation for going to the moon is to honor his daughter somehow, and when he the bracelet there. And again, I hesitate to say too much because I feel like things get different along those fronts when you have a kid, and I don't. But I felt like he was trying to build it up more than resonated with me personally. I didn't hate it. I just thought the whole through line felt slightly forced in there. I don't know.
I see.
How about you?
Well, it worked for me just because in the larger spirit of how we saw Neil Armstrong, always from a distance and not verbally, articulating his points or his needs or desires. I made what I did out of it. I mean, I guess I am a father, but I don't think that helped all that much, other than to say they also had that other that we talked about, that other point where he was asked in that meeting, is your daughter going to affect you? And he's like, basically says, yeah, but it's not a yes and no. And then I thought it was good closure, because it was like, yes, she is going to affect me. It's part of my motivation, but in the end, it's a good thing. I get closure. And also I took the fact that he never went to space again as kind of a, like, this was a connected thing, and I'm closing a chapter of my life, which includes both my daughter and the space program. I guess it worked for me, but it also was, it's not like it was amazing. Like it could have been removed and the story would have probably worked fine too. But it was good for me.
And then we end pretty abruptly after that. We just see like one scene of him going to quarantine, and then one little scene of his wife meeting him in quarantine, even though they can't talk to each other. Can I ask you what you made of the very ending when he's with his wife and they can't talk to each other, but they look at each other through the glass?
Yeah, this is the one that I would have put some more effort into. Well, that's the wrong phrase, but I didn't get this. It's a long staring contest followed by he does a kiss on his fingers and puts it on the glass because they're between glass, and then it fades to black or whatever. And it didn't work for me. I wanted more closure. If anything, that very end scene, it felt so two things. One is, on the one hand, it felt very real, like a long pause with no talking, and then the guy who doesn't know how to communicate anyway does his one emotional thing, which is barely anything. But then as a moviegoer, I was like, yeah, well, that might be true, but then what happens? Or like, still don't end the movie here. Like, it's not the scene was the problem, but that this was what we all built up to, and this was the resolution right before the credits. It just felt like I needed a little more.
Yeah, or I didn't quite get what they were trying to say. I'll agree that much. But it makes me just try to figure out what they might have been trying to say or what possibilities, because his wife, wasn't like relieved to see him because she missed him or that he was alive after something dangerous. I mean, maybe she was, but that wasn't like the primary emotion she was displaying. He wasn't displaying that either. At the same time, it wasn't because like their marriage seemed to be on the rocks or anything like that. They seemed to have a fine marriage. It's just a highly stressful, highly dangerous one, and so that causes that kind of strife. But I don't know. It was confusing what they were trying to convey. But you bring up a good point that it does seem real, like they just been through something so huge as a family, that they had to deal with the uncertainty that it's just they haven't processed it. They don't know what to say or how to react.
Yeah, and maybe that's life. But it felt like a little bit of a letdown. But it also, it didn't. Again, it's a thing where I want to say it didn't ruin the movie, but it didn't help it either.
So we sort of meandered, gone back and forth.
That's good.
I feel like I've said most of what I have to say. Anything more you want to say?
Yeah, I mean, it's practically endorsed. We recommend this. We think it's a good movie, both of us. It's interesting. I feel like this season there are going to be it's already starting to feel like there's a lot of good movies. So it'll be interesting to see where this nets out comparatively. But in an absolute sense, yeah, I recommend it. It's solid, even if not at the top of my list, likely.
Right on. Well, let's get to our top 5-ish list. And this time I want to do, let's see how to describe this, because we were sort of haggling over the strict definitions, like reality-based space movies. I guess maybe we'll call it that way.
Sure. Let's try it. I feel like there's only like 3 of them ever made, but that's okay. We're still going to make a list.
Okay. So you want to go first?
Yeah, I'm going to say First Man. This is the best one I've seen in my many years of reality-based space movie watching. So First Man is at the top of the list.
I can't disagree with that one. I mean, it's pretentious in the way that I like, and it's well done and well movie made and directed. So fine. I'll throw in. I only kind of have a memory of this. It's been a long time, but I'm going to say The Right Stuff, which is actually kind of different. A lot of swagger, a lot of cowboy masculinity instead of buttoned-up repressed masculinity. But I really liked The Right Stuff, even though it's been a long time since I've seen it. I feel like it's a classic.
I never saw that one. It's on my forever long to do, but I'll take your word for it.
Okay.
I'm going to say Apollo 13. This was like one of the classic Tom Hanks movies of the, I want to say, mid-90s. I think I saw it in a drive-through, and then I saw it again. I feel like
that's true. It's one of those string of like Forrest Gump and Apollo 13 and Castaway, just when he was just the guy.
Yeah, and Apollo 13 was also good because it was a very safe movie. Like, I feel like I might have gone on multiple dates with this movie or something.
Fair enough. The other one I'm going to throw out there is Hidden Figures, which was fine. Was it last year, the year before, something like that? Yeah, but it didn't light me up the way it lit a lot of people up. Not to mention that, as you say, there aren't a ton of them, but I guess that's what we got.
Yeah, and I guess Hidden Figures is the counterpoint to my other point, in so much as that movie is all about black people contributing to the space program without being recognized for it, right?
Yeah, that's true.
So there you go. So that's a thing. Yeah. That's
good. Our top 5-ish list, I think we're going to go with First Man, The Right Stuff, Apollo 13, Hidden Figures. No.
Okay.
Apollo 13 before The Right Stuff. First Man, Apollo 13, The Right Stuff, Hidden Figures. Yeah?
Yeah, I'd prefer that because that works with my list, which is First Man and then Apollo 13.
All right. Well, there you go. First Man, spoiled. And if you listen to that watching it first, we hope you can now fake it fairly well in whatever social situations you may need to. And that is this episode of the Practically Culture Spoilercast. Join us next week as we spoil. What are we spoiling next week?
The Sisters Brothers, maybe.
All right, I'll allow it. As we spoil the Sisters Brothers, we have the usual top 5-ish list and chat about what we're watching. You can find more from us at practicallyculture.com, on YouTube, and in your favorite podcast app. Like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter. I'm at Logan Bill, Bob's at Bob Caswell. Send us a message, ask us a question, let us know how you like the show. Come back and get your pop culture spoiled, people. Thanks for rocking with us.
Have a good one.